All right, we are live here for this live edition of the New Warehouse podcast, and a very special edition because we are going to be diving deep into the world of ASRS. And if you're not familiar with ASRS, that stands for Automated Storage and Retrieval Systems. And we're going to talk all about that today with two people that are very familiar with them because they use them in their operations. So if you're curious about them and you're curious how they go about, what are the benefits, what are some of the challenges there? Well, we're going to dive into all of that today. So if you're joining us, if you're in the audience out there, leave a comment. Let us know where you're joining from today. And let us know, too, if you have any questions for our panelists today. But before we get into that and introduce our panelists, you can see them on the screen there. They are great guys, but we're going to talk to them in a second. This edition of the New Warehouse Podcast Live is brought to you by MHI's Industry Group, focused on ASRS. If you're not familiar with MHI, they are the ones that put on the big show, ProMat, Modex. They'll be hosting Modex this year and do tons of education in the material handling industry and support the industry in advancing and moving forward. And they have industry groups that are focused on particular segments of the industry. And this particular industry group, as you can imagine, is supporting the ASRS. So they're supporting today's show to bring more information about the ASRS world and also allowing people to understand more from an unbiased perspective on what is happening in that part of the industry, and also support you as you attend events like Modex to be able to learn more about these different segments of the material handling industry. So definitely check them out. MHI.org/ASRS. Pretty good domain, pretty easy to remember, I'll say. MHI.org/ASRS. So check that out. And there's tons of resources there to learn more about this topic as well. So thank you to them for supporting today. And ASRS, if you're not familiar, stands for Automated Storage and Retrieval System. If anybody's in the audience and they have an ASRS, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. So let us know there, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Shout out to Arson coming in from LA, representing Ops Engine, a 3PL out there. Hey, Arson, good to see you. And our panelists today, our guests are Jason Minghini, who is the SVP of Supply Chain Solutions at Kenco, and Omer Rashid, who is from DHL Supply Chain. And he is the Vice President of Operations Development. And why are they joining us to talk about ASRS? Well, they know a thing or two about ASRS because they use them in their operations. So that's why we titled this thing All Things ASRS, with people who use ASRS because they use them. So let's kick it off here. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your position, and maybe tell us a little bit about how you're involved in the ASRS world.
Yeah, for sure. Jason Minghini. I am the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Solutions for Kenco. Been there about 12 years in total. I left back in 2016, came back in 2019. So I always like to say I liked Kenco so much, I wanted to come back, and they liked me so much, they let me come back, right? So came back. I have responsibility overall for supply chain solutions, which includes engineering, robotics, automation, program management, industrial site engineering. So anything that you would consider to be the normal geeky engineering type stuff, that kind of falls under my, I guess, domain, if you will. We've kind of stepped up our game a lot on the Kenco perspective in terms of automation, specifically around ASRS. We use AutoStore and High and Gray Orange and those type of automations. And so I'm very excited to kind of talk to the team today and talk about our journey, maybe some common pitfalls that we've kind of gone through. Honestly, the market is vastly changing. I know Kevin and I were kind of talking a little bit before we jumped on and Manifest and how that's grown, but just how you can, I guess, dynamically change to the market and the technology as you kind of implement this in the operations. So excited to talk to you guys today.
All right, definitely. And Omar, how about you?
Yeah, hey, good morning, Kevin, Jason, everyone else. Great to be here. I am with our Operations Excellence team within DHL Supply Chain. I've been here for just coming up on 15 years, and in my role, I have responsibility for automation, innovation, and analytics, similar to Jason with an engineering focus. We work with our suppliers and partners to deploy advanced solutions for all of our operations. And for those of you not familiar with DHL Supply Chain, we're part of DHL Group. So we are the contract logistics arm of DHL Group, and we work across all industries, all sectors: automotive, retail, e-commerce, consumer, life sciences, technology. And a majority of our sites as a 3PL are dedicated to customers for warehousing or transport operations. And we have probably over 600 sites in North America, US and Canada, and that spans over 200 million square feet of warehousing space. So within those warehouses, we do have a lot of automation, including ASRS systems. And Kevin, when you talk about ASRS systems, that spans, from different unit loads, from pallets handling to tote handling to case handling. So happy to kind of get into any of those and all of the above in terms of how we service our customers with those solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And great to have you both on here. And it sounds like you got some experience with ASRS, today's topic, right? And a couple 100 million square feet between the both of you right out there in the world. So some experience in operations too as well. So why don't we kind of kick it off a little bit here, and let's talk a little bit about it. You've both installed these systems, have them in your operations currently running. Let's talk a little bit about kind of why you landed on these solutions. So maybe Jason, you want to start. You mentioned you got a couple different solutions there from various providers and vendors. So tell us a little bit about, why did you initially deploy ASRS systems in the first place, and what was kind of the driving factor there?
Yep. So, if we look back several years, I think pre-COVID, a lot of 3PLs and a lot of other, I guess, end users were starting to toy with the concept of automation and robotics. I think a lot of us, talked about it. We started delving into it a little bit, and then COVID hit. And obviously there was a shortage of people to go to the DCs to kind of pick and pack and ship product for the customers. And then you couple that with wage inflation, it really started to say, hey, we need to stop playing with the automation and really start using the automation. So at that point, we picked AutoStore really for our first major implementations of ASRS. It was on our really on our D2C side because it needed to fulfill that need. And we put those systems in. Here's the thing, and I think this is something we probably need to talk a little bit more today, is just how things change so dynamically, right? AutoStore was really well known for, hey, cube density going up, squeezing a lot in a short amount of footprint, increasing throughput from a picking perspective. Obviously, that helps from a labor perspective to keep the amount of people you need, and then the cost of the people down to the minimum. And then other people come onto the mix, like High Robotics with their high 2 and high 3s. And then you've got, mini load type systems or pallet loads. They all have their function. And so you have to really figure out which one is going to be there to serve that particular problem that you have today. They all really press each other to continue to innovate. For instance, I think last year AutoStore announced they're going to start doing case induction into their base systems, or allowing mixed bin use sizes, right? That's in direct, I think, response to the highs of the world that are now doing case induction as well. So they're really, I guess, building off of each other. But predominantly the reason why we started looking at these systems in earnest was really, we started before COVID, but then COVID kind of really exponentially increased the push or the need to do it, just simply from a labor perspective. Really quick, I think we've talked about this before, and you see it all over LinkedIn and the news. We just don't have enough workers right now. I mean, if you look at between retirements and people entering the workforce, I think 18 to 24 is the lowest participation rate in history. People are retiring at a really good clip. We're not replicating as much as we should. So there's going to continue to be a worker shortage. I know at MHI, we have Jason Shanker, who comes in and talks to us really every quarter. And he always says, hey, if everybody that had a job, wanted a job was filled, there'd still be about 3 million people needed to work, right? So if we're not going to solve the immigration issue, where are we going to get those workers? Well, it's going to be the automation. So And that's the reason why we're continuing to kind of push forward with not only our existing automation, but also looking at vendors that are entering the market and how we can kind of bring them into the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, very interesting to hear that, and also the different kind of applications you mentioned there, and Omar mentioned earlier too. So, Omar, what about on your side? What has kind of been the approach to ASRS, and what are some of the catalysts that are driving you to utilize some of these systems?
Yeah, I would just build off of a little bit what Jason said. I really think over the last several years we've hit a bit of an inflection point where labor is hard to find. Technology, the cost of technology has come down significantly, and actually there's an abundance of suppliers, partners out there providing ASRS type solutions. So there's a breadth of technology. So those all give us options to work with in this space, right? At the same time, you are talking about heavy capital investments. So, the profiles that drive us to put in ASRS are really talking about high volume, high density requirements for storage, maybe a high value type inventory that you want to keep, in a secure location. But when we talk about, let's talk about maybe an auto store or shuttle system, right? So piece picking operations where you have high number of SKUs that you might need to batch across several orders, right? So an e-com, a retail type business, where you can then get the benefits of not just the storage in the ASRS, but the slotting and the goods to person type aspect of that allows a picker to be really efficient, right? And I think the other part of this is, I mentioned on the warehousing space, the density of the storage, right? And having visibility to inventory in one place. So that has driven a lot of accuracy, which is also a requirement for operations. And I think the last part when we talk about ASRS is generally a lot of these systems can help reduce order cycle time. So if you have tight turns on your orders, if you need to get those out accurately across a high volume and high SKU base, then we've been driven towards ASRS systems in a number of our sites. And that's across all sectors, honestly, whether it's a life science operation or an automotive operation. If the profile fits and you can reduce the number of labor hours that you would do in a manual operation across that ASRS system, then we found some good fits for those type of operations.
Yeah, very interesting. And let's talk a little bit about kind of that fit that you just mentioned there, because you're both in contract logistics 3PL space, right? So there is a definitive amount of time for engagement with a brand or a client that you're bringing in, and some ASRS systems can be an investment, right? So how do you look at it and say that, okay, this client is going to be a fit for an operation that has an ASRS in it, and we will make sure that investment it plays out? And how do you determine that, like, okay, now is the time to utilize ASRS versus like, no, we should use a different type of system or different setup for this client or this brand?
Yeah, so if I could start with that, Kevin, I think
Sure.
our approach is to engineer a solution for a given operation. So we actually don't build a solution and try and fit customers or profiles in there. So it's really about that customer profile and looking at what would a manual operation look like for that book of business, and then comparing that against different ASR systems and seeing if there's a good payback on that, right? And that is driven by some of the things I mentioned before, right? Space utilization, labor efficiency, throughput capability to drive cycle times, quality and accuracy, and then some of the security items around the inventory. So all those factors really, they're kind of generic when you talk about automation in general. But again, that space utilization is a little, and the goods to person aspect is really unique to the ASR system. So if you can justify that capital investment, it still might be a big spend. But looking at the horizon, right, over a 5-10 year period, the amount of time you're going to use a system like this for will help you kind of roadmap out that capacity you need, and then kind of justify that type of system.
Okay. And Jason, how do you approach it?
Yeah, I would say we kind of approach it Similar, but maybe in a slightly different way too. We've got dedicated ASRS systems, like Omar said. I mean, we have a building that's got one client in it, and hey, here's an ASRS system that kind of complements that. We also, in our multi-client building, almost have a build it and they will come type mentality, right? So we will put, for instance, an auto store in. It's not completely at capacity, but we know what type of profile we want to kind of sell into, if you will, and then we'll go out and try to find and attract those clients to kind of go into it. The one thing that we've really focused on too, and in ASRS, I was thinking about this earlier. ASRS is a very old acronym. All right, it's been around for many, many years, but there's a lot of things that fall into ASRS than what you would typically remember as a pallet load type shuttle type system, right? Which is really where that acronym came from. Now it's, you got the Highs of the world, the auto stores of the world, you got gray orange rack to persons, the Okiva type systems of the world, right? So it's really anything that automatically puts inventory into some type of grid, and then when you have an order, it pulls the inventory towards you, right, to minimize that travel and the head count. So it really continues to expand. And what we've seen, quite honestly, is back 15 years ago, you would have these monuments. What I mean by that is the technology would be so fixed and so dependent on that one profile that if the profile changed, then the technology would be really obsolete at that point, right? Today, that technology is much more flexible to be able to shift, if you will, with some of the profile changes that are naturally going to happen. We also are putting into buildings multiple different types of ASRS systems. For instance, an auto store with a gray-orange rack-to-person system, to where if the product is small and light, it'll go in auto store. But if it switches and the profile changes and it needs to be a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, then we'll put it in the rack-to-person system, right? But we have an automated solution that can cover really all bands of this profile spectrum, so that as the customer changes, we still have that automated solution to help minimize cost and increase throughput, and then maximize the compliance to our SLAs.
Yeah, if I could build off that, sorry, Kevin. Sure. I think it's a great point. It seems minimal, but the systems are more than ASRS, right? We're not just storing product; we're enabling faster production. Enabling our workers to be more efficient. And that's the technology on the physical side with ASRS, but the systems that enable kind of that dynamic operation allow for some of the flexibility that Jason mentioned, I think is really important here. You still have your traditional, pallet load, pallet in, 100-foot high bay that you need in some cases, but really, I think they're much more dynamic than you might traditionally think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to, as you both mentioned there, like to denote that kind of difference in, the broad umbrella, I guess, as you said, Jason, there, to of the different solutions that fall underneath that, right? It's not all just pallet shuttle. It's not all like cube storage, like an auto store that we mentioned here. So, and there's been some, certainly advancements over the last, 2 years, I would say, where we're seeing, you mentioned high, right? They, kind of notably do the climbing, right? It's kind of what they call it. And so tell us a little bit about, like, how do you view some of those advancements? Because you have, the auto store you mentioned where the bot is on top, right? And digging for bins, where then you have some other solutions where they've kind of decoupled the robots, where there's, one that's grabbing the bin, but then it's dropping it to an AMR on below, and things of that nature. How do you kind of look at these different advancements and assess, like, where you think you might get more throughput or more efficiency or more gains through that?
Yeah, Omar, I guess I'll start there, and you can add on. I mean, and I know DHL does as well. We have an innovation lab, right? And we're actually launching our innovation lab 2.0 in May, because the market is changing so much. What we're doing there is we're going to put what we call our core 5 technologies in: auto store, high, gray orange, locust, those type of systems. And as these new systems come in, or the high may change from a high 2 to high 3, right? Or auto store may do case induction. And what we'll do is in our lab, we will interject that new technology into the lab and see how it really plays across the ecosystem, right? Just to make sure that we're playing well in the sandbox. I mean, Omar mentioned it before, is too, not only is it physical automation, but it's also the digital piece. Because as you bring all this technology in, especially when you make technology coexist together, then unless you add an army of people in the front end trying to divvy up orders and wave and all that great stuff, what digital automation are you going to put on the front to kind of manage everything, right? So you also have to think about that. But we kind of do a, hey, here comes a new technology. How does it fit to the ecosystem? Is it new? Is it brand new? Or is it an enhancement to the current technology? Let's bring it in. Let's test it. Let's optimize it, and then we'll put a kind of a rollout strategy to our operations across North America.
Okay, Omer.
Yeah, I think similar to that, right? We do have an innovation center where we work with a number of partners, startups in the space to test technology and evaluate it. I'd say we also have a pretty strict governance process given the explosion of new vendors, partners that are on the market, and we call it our innovation funnel. So as we have use cases that we think we can automate, we'll identify partners that are also trying to solve that same problem and go through kind of a process where we will test and pilot a new technology on a smaller scale if we can. If that goes well, we're measuring the results, seeing how it performs. But anything we pilot, we already have a view to where we could fit it into a current operation at a larger scale. So if we can deliver, if we can integrate efficiently in that pilot scenario, and we know we're ready to scale, that's kind of our approach to bringing in new technology and evaluating. But it's all use case driven, right? It's what do we have to process? What is the type of product? What is the profile of that product? And how can we now handle that efficiently, given there's many different technologies out there to handle it? And often, robots are one thing, the system piece is another thing. And not to throw out too many buzzwords here, but when you start to orchestrate different solutions under the same warehouse, under the same four walls, that's when you start to get kind of the best of breed solutions working together. And that testing approach is really effective in that environment. And that's not to say large scale ASRS deployments aren't viable anymore. Those are just, those operations where you have really high volume requirements and high cycle time requirements. Those are going to drive towards those higher capital solutions. And the innovative solutions I'm talking about with robotics, gives you a bit more flexibility to grow into higher volume solutions as well. So I think the approach is really important. I think not everybody has the luxury of doing that. If you're running a single site or multiple sites. But I think that is just a very pragmatic way to step into a solution so that it's ready to go when you want to deploy at larger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you both have the innovation centers. I've been to the DHL one out in Chicago area, right. Which is pretty cool. But I don't know. I got to say, Jason, I haven't gotten an invite to the Kenco one.
Well, I'll get you an invite shortly after.
we got it on tape here, so we'll love to see that. But I think that's so great to be able to create that. And I love that you said the innovation funnel in a sense, right? Like, how do we look at some of these new things? Because there is certainly just an explosion of technology and new approaches and new ways to look at it. And, to your point, it's kind of like, okay, well, this is enticing. It's interesting, right? But how do we make sure this is viable for the long term in that sense? So I love that idea of kind of developing that innovation funnel. So now from the ASRS perspective, you've implemented these, you've deployed multiple different systems from different vendors, and you talked about some of the reasons there being labor efficiency increase, addressing some of the labor shortage and gap, the density use case or problem set, obviously. But I'm curious, what are some of the other benefits that you've seen, or maybe benefits that you weren't necessarily expecting, but were surprised to also gain from the implementation of these systems?
Yeah, I guess I can start with that.
Sure.
I think there's a perception around fixed automation that it's not flexible, right? And I would say we've discovered, especially when you talk about shuttle or robotic systems, they're more flexible than they get credit for, right? And that often comes with complexity of operations. So in one of our shuttle operations, which is for retail or omni-channel business in the apparel end of things, we're able to store cartons in inventory for split case fulfillment. We're able to store full case cartons for full case picking, decanted inventory into totes where the unit handling is a bit different. And then also use the same system as a buffer for outbound orders, right? So that kind of allows you to flex a little bit of capacity within that system, which I think traditionally may not have been there because it's enabled by an execution system, right, that sees all the inventory, understands all the different order profiles, and can manage the technology effectively. So I think, to me at least, that's been the biggest aspect in terms of it's more flexible than we think. Then I think there is a modular aspect to some of these systems too, where you can actually add capacity as you grow, as long as you account for that in your early design. And I would say in the past, maybe that wasn't the case, right? It was kind of build it for one day of the year, Easter Sunday, we used to say, and then you'd have to kind of build over capacity for the rest of the year. And I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore, because we're smarter about how we use ASRS systems.
Okay. And Jason?
Yeah, I think a couple of things to add to that. I mean, you mentioned the modularity of it. I think that's 100% true. I think before, especially your big crane type systems, it was more of a greenfield versus a brownfield, right? I mean, you had to have the high bay, you had to have the building space. Now, once you get these systems in, they're fairly easy to expand without even shutting down their current operation, right? So that's certainly a big benefit. The one thing that we saw a huge uplift for, that we kind of thought was going to happen going into it, but we didn't realize the impact, was training, right? So usually you bring a forklift operator in, they got to be certified, they got to learn the WMS.
Sure.
It's fairly complicated, but if you're using an ASRS, like an AutoStore or whatever, that has a screen, an HMI screen, really it comes in, you put them in front of the port, they look at the screen, it's got a picture of it, it's got a light shining in the bin they need to pick from. They pick it, they scan it, there's a pick the light bar type system behind them, they put it in. So training for peak and bringing people in before you had to bring people in weeks in advance to get all the training done. Well, now you don't have to do that. You still have to bring them in advance. But the impact of training was something that we knew we were going to get. But once we started measuring the results, we didn't realize we were going to get this big benefit as what we actually did.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one to call out there too, because I've demoed and worked with some of these ASRS systems as well, and seen them in person. And certainly like some of the things that you talked about there, like lighting up the bin and being very clear on the screen on exactly like what needs to be picked and stuff, certainly I imagine increases that training time, or decreases the amount of training time, right? And it ramps up that person a lot faster. So I can imagine that is like a huge lift, especially when you're looking at that peak. And very interesting to hear you both say that there's more flexibility or modularity around it than perceived. I'm definitely interested to hear that. So what about from a challenges perspective? Like, what have been some of the challenges as you've navigated these different ASRS systems that either maybe you expected, didn't expect, that you would, advise other people to maybe learn from your challenges that you've faced, so maybe they don't face them as well? What have been some of the challenges there?
I guess I'll start there.
Go ahead.
I was saying, in today's world, I mean, a lot of this stuff doesn't get manufactured in the States. So the current tariff structure that we're under and how that changes from a day-to-day perspective,
oh, interesting, yeah,
right, is definitely impacting some of the things that we're doing. Hey, should we go ahead and move on this? Or, when that stuff gets to the port and tariffs are starting to be assessed, do we wait and see what happens? Or, what do we do in terms of that? That's kind of a bigger piece of it. The other piece, I think Omar hit on this earlier, is instead of looking at it in a singular type piece of technology in the warehouse, look at it from end to end, right? And how is that going to tie together with different pieces of technology? How's the orchestration going to happen, both from a people perspective as well as a technology perspective? I think one thing that we didn't do as well as we should have was we focused so much on that big piece of capital investment that we didn't look kind of holistically across every value stream in the warehouse to say, how's everything going to connect together? How does one really flow into the other? How does it support that getting it maximized as well? And we kind of were doing that on the backside, right? And the last piece I would say too is, if you're not going to put everything in at once, what you do have to plan for, because we mentioned things change really, really fast. Like in one of our distribution centers, we said, hey, here's AutoStore, but next year we may do Geek Plus and add to it, or put some amp bots in to kind of move stuff around. By the time we got to that point, those had already moved on to something else, and now there's something else on the market that we had to consider to interact or interject in with. So you either got to go quick or you got to be very thoughtful about the future and how things may change and how that may change your overall warehouse design for sure.
And it's a great point, because I was going to say, most of the challenges we've experienced are on, I'd say, the front end deployment and between when you've designed and have to implement a system. And some of that is driven by lead time, right? So these solutions definitely have a longer lead time than if you're just setting up a manual warehouse. And so, the effort it takes to design around a system and take 12 months or 8 to 16 months to deploy, things change in our business, right? Especially these days, very volatile. So where we've learned how do we account for possible change in a business while we're implementing a solution, so allowing for some of that flexibility is really important. And then you can dig down a little bit deeper, right? You really need to understand your data. Right. So having accurate information on at the SKU level, on dimensions, on the pack sizes, how are items going to fit into totes efficiently, because that drives a lot of utilization considerations. And so where we've had poor quality data, that causes challenges when you are going live and then discovering that, okay, we got to make some adjustments here because what we thought was true was not true. The system may perform at a rate that you expect it to, but again, how are you feeding it? How is the profile you've designed it around matching what you've implemented? And those are the two biggest learnings, I think. Even though earlier, hopefully it doesn't contradict. There is flexibility, but I think that having that confidence in the information you've designed around is so crucial and important, and it's worth the time up front to understand that SKU level data, so that when you go live, you know exactly what you're putting into a system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that data is such an important part that you mentioned there, because I did a project back in my career back in the day. We did like a Dematic multi-shuttle system, right? And we had very poor master data, I will say, going into that project. And yeah, we had to hire like people to come in just full time and just do Cubiscan all day long. Like we had like 30,000 some SKUs, and we were missing tons of dimension data. And obviously, when you talk about the tote itself, right, you can't go above the tote, right? You got it, or you get jams and all these things. So getting that mapped out and right, it was such an important part of that process. So very interesting there. And I'm curious on that kind of thread too. I mean, when we think about bringing in one of these systems, I know one challenge that we had when we did that project was we had to have a different kind of maintenance person on staff, right, to be able to support. So how does bringing in these types of systems, I mean, how does that change kind of the team's skill set that's needed, and kind of what talent or I guess other types of skill sets do you need to bring into the operation to be able to then support this once it's live?
Yeah, honestly, sorry, Jason, it's probably one of the most overlooked aspects of when you put in a system like this is what is the maintenance program? What parts do you have in place, and how are you going to staff appropriately, either working with your vendor or having in-house maintenance, and a combination of the both to make sure, the key is uptime, right? So how do you ensure that uptime between your teams? And so that's those skills can be hard to find depending on, again, what system, what technology you're putting in, especially if you're talking about robotics that we're not used to maintaining, and then you're very reliant on your partners to be able to support those systems. And then just understanding what to look for, right, and how to react. I think aside from maintaining a system, if a shuttle goes down, a robot goes down, just having the right work instructions and procedures in place with how to remove it, how to keep the system going, is a new way of training that is really important, because it could be a simple maneuver, but if you're not aware of what to do, then it could gridlock your whole system. So I think the maintenance is a key part of it. I think, just to build off of what skill sets, right, from an operations standpoint, the flows of the system, there's a heartbeat to an automation operation that takes some getting used to. So understanding how the systems relate from a WMS to the WES, the timing of when information is available, and how product is flowing from different areas within the ASRS system. it comes with a bit of experience, but also living through that. So finding folks who have that experience, giving them an opportunity to step into operations, so not going live with full volume day one, but getting a feel for that heartbeat is really important. And the last thing I'll say here is Jason touched on it. Training is facilitated for operators, for the associates who are maybe picking the product. They have UIs that make their lives easier, light indicators, things like that. But again, it is different than what they're used to, right? So just ensuring they understand what the work is and what impact it has on the operation is really important. So I would say, 5 years ago, I would have said, hey, you need people who understand the technology, but everything we're putting in, our associates expect to have a level of technology that they're used to in their daily lives, whether it's an app-based technology or real-time information. So I think that aspect is less important than just kind of making sure folks understand their role in the automation system.
Yeah. And what do you see on your side, Jason?
No, I think the maintenance is a big piece of it as well. One thing that we actually did a fairly good job of is looking forward. We have a fleet services team at Kenco who does forklift maintenance in a lot of distribution centers, even ones that we don't operate, right? Or even some of our customer manufacturing centers. So as we started to work a lot more with robotics and automation, we actually brought them into the mix to let them do the maintenance because we have service techs all across the country. We actually maintain ASRS systems that in manufacturing that we don't even operate. And so we pick up all that skill set. And as we bring, the systems on our side of the fence and in our warehouses, we're just leveraging their skill set. So we've actually done a really, really good job actually getting in front of the maintenance piece, but it's super important. Omar mentioned uptime is king. The minute that bot or that system goes down and it's not producing throughput, then you're in danger of missing your SLA. So the quicker you get it up, the better off you're going to be. One thing that we also learned, maybe feel a little bit of pain as well, is you need to have a really good help desk, right? If you don't have kind of, operators on site that can do the mechanical piece, but there's also a software piece that the system may be going down because there's some IT issues going on. Well, usually if you have somebody that's going to know, PLC code or know how to turn a screw or a wrench, then they're not going to know that piece. So you have to have a really good help desk to be able to go in and see what's going on from a system perspective or an IT perspective as well. But maintenance is extremely important. And I think a lot of people miss that on the front end when they're designing the systems. They don't keep enough spare parts on hand. They don't factor that in. They don't factor maintenance techs on site to make sure that the system's operating. But the minute it goes down, it'll pay for itself. So you just make sure you factor that in.
Yeah, absolutely. And a ton of great points there, because I think that, it's one thing to get the installation together, get it implemented, get it deployed, get to go live, right? But then it's about like you both said, like that uptime, like how do we keep this thing running? How do we maximize the utilization? How do we make sure we're getting the most throughput, the efficiency, and the gains that we planned on getting, right, in the first place, right? And that maintenance certainly is a big point. I'll say I was up in that tower a couple times at 1 a.m. clearing jams, and that was not fun.
We've all been there before.
yeah, definitely got the scars from that. But yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about. We get an interesting question from Heath here in the comments, asking about kind of complementary technologies to the ASRS itself, right? And I think we've seen some advancements in that in terms of automating the decanting into the system. I know recently I saw the demo of I think it was like right-hand robotics piece picking out of the auto store totes, which is pretty impressive, and they've evolved a lot in that. So how are you approaching some of those complementing technologies? And I think you touched briefly on it earlier about kind of the thinking about the overall picture and like the end to end. So maybe Jason, you want to start with that one? Like, how are you looking at that? What are you approaching? What are you maybe utilizing already? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think holistically I think even somebody mentioned in maybe Heath it says lights out, that dark warehouse concept where, the only way you're going to do that is to really eliminate the human as much as you can to do the physical work, right? And so when we look at it, if 75% of a picker's time in a warehouse is travel distance, right? So you've got travel distance, you've got touches. And so everything that we're looking at, we're trying to reduce that human to product interaction. And the next piece for like an auto store, for instance, or even type of pick port is, can I put an arm in there to actually pick the product out of the bin and put it into the in shipping container? Or can I decant product going into the system as well? So we actually are working with some vendors now to potentially put some test units in some of our auto stores in the field that have some open capacity that's not during peak, just figure out how we can actually eliminate or optimize that. So the other piece is, you load the systems up. Do you convey the pick product to the packaging station where there's somebody that's packaging? We're also working with automated packaging vendors to where we're automatically moving that product with bots to a automated packaging machine. It then feeds into the packaging machine at either a poly bag or a box. It labels it, it spits it out, and then there's another bot that basically takes it from there to the outbound container and sorts it based on the mode of shipping, right? So what we're trying to figure out is, here's all the human interaction. Are you ever going to be able to get rid of 100% of the human touch points? Absolutely not. I think that's what I would call utopia. But if you look and say, hey, what's the next most labor intensive process? And then what are there some complementary technologies out there that you can put in to reduce or eliminate it? That's kind of what we're focused on now.
Interesting. And Omar, what about on your side?
Yeah, very similar. Just thinking as Jason was going through that, kind of what we have in place. There's not an ASRS system we have, and we have probably 20, I would say, across our business that doesn't have some sort of conveyance sortation at the other end, right? So the system I spoke about earlier, where we might be picking cartons for piece picking or full case, we have a unit sorter at the other end of that, so that we can then pick, right? And so marrying those technologies shouldn't be overlooked either. It's really important that they work together, especially if they're from different partners. If you have an auto store, for example, they don't provide the conveyor system. So finding the right integrator that can make that efficient is really important. And then when you get down to the touch points, right, we're all trying to eliminate labor, touch labor. We do have operations where we have goods to person or robotic piece picking. Again, what is your SKU variety? So that robot can consistently pick out of that tote that's presented to us. So we have a few operations that are effectively doing that today. And so we'll continue to kind of look at those options. And then on the front end, anywhere from unloading into the system, decanting into the system, there are solutions out there. Whether they can do it at the speed and scale we need to, I think it'll get there one day. So we continue to experiment with that as well. And again, bring it back to the orchestration piece. The biggest component of that is, how are you getting visibility to that flow across all of those different technologies, so that your folks on the floor can see what's happening in real time, respond if they need to, but also have our systems talking. Handoffs are very smooth way. So everything's possible. We're doing a lot of it, but I would say the most common aspect out of an ASRS is some sort of sortation conveyance after the pick process.
Yeah, very interesting. And it's interesting to see kind of these technologies added on there, right? And it's like, there's always been, or not always, but, in the last few years, about collaborative robots, right? But I think like we're seeing like not only where the robot is collaborating like with the human, but the robot is collaborating with other robots now too, which I think is pretty cool to see. And certainly saw like a very interesting use case at CVS distribution center, where they had auto store, and that was going out, feeding out to a robotic arm, which was going to a Tompkins T-sort to sort out for the different retail outlets and stuff. So seeing kind of this end to end, and like how much can we do, right? And then those totes were flowing down the conveyor and going to a palletizer and things. Is very interesting to see there. So really interesting. I mean, diving into this topic and seeing this, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, right? I know we keep mentioning like auto stores getting a lot of love here, I think a little bit, but of course, like, but Bill asks here, like, what are your thoughts on pallet level ASRS? So I'm curious, do you have a lot of kind of pallet level ASRS in your operations, and are you using maybe some AGVs or AMRs that feed into that?
Omar, you want to go, or you want me to start?
I just want to say hi to Bill, old colleague, I think. How you doing, Bill?
Bill. I love the last name. Great last name.
Yeah, I mean, we do have pallet ASRSs. I think there's two different applications. There's more of a traditional one high bay storage. We've got a cold storage solutions, frozen refrigerator, where they're hard work environments, and you generally have higher inventory requirements. So pallet level ASRS is still effective there. Again, there it's more of a purpose-built type operation where you're going high bay. So that is a longer time perspective you're looking at, but very effective for that type of operation. On the other end, we've got pretty complex retail operations. We've deployed systems like Witrons and so on, where you do have pallet level ASRS. So you're putting away with the pallet level ASRS. Those are also replenishing pick locations that might be then manually picked, but also feeding automated case picking lines. So there's a lot of that application. I would again go to that's still in the area of higher capital, right? Longer outlook for what we want to deploy, but in that right profile, absolutely very effective systems for us. And again, it kind of allows for more inventory control, more visibility, but I would say your demand and inventory levels you want to have more predictable in that type of environment. So we have several of them. I would say we're deploying fewer and fewer just because of the dynamic nature of a lot of our customers' businesses, right? Supply chains need to be agile. So if you're making a decision to put a high bay warehouse in one area, you need to be comfortable with that decision for several years, and there's absolutely cases for that. But I would say more and more we're seeing folks want more flexibility, less inventory, more turn time in some of their operations.
Yeah. And what about Jason on your side?
Yeah, we don't use a lot of pallet type systems. I mean, and what I would say too, it goes back to the old ASRS acronym. I mean, back in the day, people did pallet load for going up. So you'd see a lot in Europe or a lot in Japan specifically, because real estate was so expensive. They would go up and use these type of systems. You never really saw it catch hold in the States as much as you did, I guess what I would call overseas or in Europe. But to Omar's point, it's just becoming so dynamic and so fluid. The pallet type shuttles are so fixed that if it does change, then it's going to be a big capital expense to kind of convert it over. So we're not using them a lot. We're not seeing them a lot anymore. We're starting to see a lot more case and each type shuttle type systems versus the pallet. So yeah, that's what we're seeing.
All right, interesting. Good question there from Bill. And we got another question from the audience here from Steve. He asks, what are some of the savings opportunities associated with ASRS that may not be initially thought of up front? There can be business case upsides that aren't obvious for people new to the ASRS world, but they are real savings. Any guidance here? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start there. I mean, one of the things, and again, we knew, we just didn't know what the how big of the impact it would be, is just inventory control, right? Once a product gets into a system, it's really hard to get it out unless you intentionally take it out, right? So, inventory loss or inventory shrink or even damage goes way down. So much so that there are customers that we used to do physical PIs every year, right? Which is really costly from a labor perspective as well as an operations perspective. But once we showed how much higher our inventory accuracy was within the system, they said, well, let's get an exclusion for doing annual PIs because we don't really need to, because there's such a high degree of control of the inventory in the system. So we went down that path, and now we really included in all our future cost savings calculations to include that. And then we kind of proactively go to the customer to go, hey, we don't have to shut down the operation once a year. It's not going to be super costly. And here's the reason why. We use data to kind of back up our business case. And then we usually eliminate physical inventories associated with these ASRS systems. So that's one that we kind of knew there was going to be a greater control from an inventory perspective. We knew damage was going to decrease. We just know we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck like that we did once we actually installed the systems.
Yeah. Jason, you mean you don't like going and counting for 16 hours on a Saturday or Sunday?
No, I don't. And then going out and doing a recount because 2 counts didn't match, right? And then those counts don't match. The supervisor's got to go out. Yeah. And then your customer goes on the backside. So no, I don't like doing all that.
Yeah, definitely. And Omar, what about some additional savings that you've seen on your side?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a big one, in terms of the inventory piece. And if I think about kind of the other aspects that you're improving with the automation, right, is the cycle time, accuracy, security, slotting. So those are all elements that today take a lot of indirect support, right? A lot of supervisor support. So there's two ways I would build that in my business case, because you're giving time back to that the professional headcount, but also probably reducing your span of control that you need, given all of that is automated. I think the second piece I wouldn't underestimate, because we've seen tremendous uplift, is what we talked about earlier, the training of associates.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes aside from finding labor, there's usually a lot of turnover in a lot of sites, right? So the less you can turn over, or the faster it is to onboard new associates and get them up to picking productivity or packing productivity that you need, that is a real benefit. And we've been able to measure that and build that into the business cases as well.
Interesting, definitely, and love those savings for sure. And let's see, we got one more question here. What are some lessons learned each of you have experienced that have become tribal knowledge that you can share? Oh, interesting. Any thoughts there?
Omar, you want to start? Or you?
Tribal knowledge. You guys document everything.
I've got one that I think Omar mentioned it earlier. Maybe even you mentioned it, Kevin. Which is the item master, right? When we first started working with ASRSs, we obviously got the data from our customer, but we never really gut checked it to see how accurate it was. We just assumed it to be correct, and then we sized systems that way. Product comes in, and we start induction, and we're like, whoa, something's wrong here. We either using way too many bins, let's say, or 100% of the SKUs aren't going in the system, whatever the case may be. So now it's just something we do. We don't even think about, to where when we have a new customer, here's your item master. Yes, you think it's 100% accurate, but can you send us some product to sample across a Cubiscan to kind of then get a level of accuracy or confidence that we have in the system, or the item master to kind of do our design work, right? So that's something that originally we had a lot of faith in our customer. We learned that, hey, maybe that faith is a little too generous, and so now we're validating that on the front side, and then that's just something that we've now just started doing religiously.
Great point there. Yeah. Oh, Omer, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I'm trying to. I think I lost you guys for a second. Can you hear me? Okay.
There. Yep, you're there.
Okay. Yeah, tribal knowledge is a hard one, because it is really, I think, site specific, because it's really understanding your business and how it works with the technology. So I'm going to punt on that a little bit, because it's hard for me to differentiate kind of what we live now day to day versus tribal knowledge. Otherwise, that's going to sound a bit hokey. It's coming back to understanding the pulse, right, of the automation, of how things flow through. If anything, kind of I could lend is that don't assume day one you're going to get all the reports, all the views you need from the system of how product is flowing. So the tribal knowledge, I guess, if I could go back and against my word, but it's what reports, what information do we build in-house that supplement kind of those regular reports we get, that give our supervisors visibility to what they need to operate the system effectively. So, and that comes down to labor, right? Even if I know based on my profile, I don't need to staff certain stations like I would normally, and I can move that to a packing station or move labor around. I think those views would be tribal knowledge, because we built a lot of that stuff in-house because there was a need for it.
Yeah, definitely. And two great points there. And Jordan kind of hits it there on the data point. Garbage in, garbage out, of course. We all know that one, right? Definitely. So appreciate you both for joining us here as we close this out. We have Modex around the corner here, a little more than a month away as we're doing this. So if people are going to Modex and they're looking at these ASRS vendors, what is one question that you would tell them they should definitely ask these vendors?
That's a great question. I would say, one, go with a game plan. I mean, it's Modex and ProMat are getting so big that you could go and spend 3 or 4 days and still get lost and not really come out with anything if you don't have a game plan. I would just say the question you should ask is, how is your technology flexible and adaptable to the market changes that you foresee is going to happen over the next 2 to 3 years. So in other words, how is your technology going to flex and innovate to keep up with the demands of the market? And if they don't have a great answer there, then you may want to go find somebody else. It's got a pretty good roadmap on, yes, we see it. We know things are going to change. We know things are going to exponentially, get higher demands. Here's what we're thinking that's going to be, and here's our roadmap to get there. And I think if they don't have a great answer, then they're going to be a short-term player that you need to go find somebody that's got more of a long-term view.
Very good question. I like that one. And Omar?
Yeah, I guess the thing I would ask, just because we've all been around a little bit, is what's next? Where are you going with the product? What do you see coming that would make your solution cut above others? Right? We said it before. There's a lot of players trying to solve the same problem, and I would definitely talk to suppliers that have multiple solutions. So they're trying to solve the same problem with different technology or in different ways. And just ask them specifically about what differentiates, an ASRS versus a traditional AMR solution, or pick the belt, or wherever you're at, and then make sure, to Jason's point, where they're going. Do they have a roadmap for how they're going to continue to improve and support their solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. And both great questions, definitely, and very future looking, right? Which I think is super important, right? As we talked about, we want this to be able to support our operation for the long term, right? And make sure that we can utilize it to its maximum capacity and, get the most out of that, right? So very much appreciate you both for joining me here today and having this discussion. Very informative on the ASRS side. And if you check in the comments, if you're watching on LinkedIn, Anna, lovely representative from MHI, who represents the ASRS Industry Group as well, has dropped some helpful links in there to check out some different educational resources, both online at mhi.org/ASRS and also at Modex themselves with some seminars that they'll be hosting specifically around ASRS as well. So if you have questions about ASRS, make sure you connect with Jason or Omar here on LinkedIn if you're watching on LinkedIn, or check out mhi.org/ASRS. And if you tuned in late, we did record this. This will be up on the New Warehouse podcast feed from an audio perspective in the next couple days, and the replay will be available on LinkedIn immediately after we end the stream, as well as on YouTube after we end the stream as well. So thank you to everyone who tuned in from across the globe. I saw somebody from UK, Canada, from the US as well. So appreciate that, and appreciate the questions in the comments as well. And as the most appreciation goes to Jason and Omar for joining us today. So thank you both for being on the live podcast and filling us in on some ASRS stuff. So thank you to everybody, and make sure you check out thenewwarehouse.com for the replays and where to find more information on everything warehousing. So thank you both, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.